Okay, we're back. Sorry for the interruption. That was my dad. He had a question. Um, so what I was saying is you can get to that next level of intimacy and conversation between, uh, you know, if you're talking to a girl. Now, obviously, it can go the other way around too. It's not just a boy talking to a girl. That's obviously my experience. But it can go the other way around, a girl talking to a boy. It applies both ways. Um, what I was saying is basically if you get to that level of intimacy, it's a difficult thing because the next step is really dating. The next step is actually dating, um, having some level of commitment to this person, spending a lot of time one on one with them, getting to know them. And that's a natural thing. And now we have the flesh, and this is going to get a little bit more complicated here as we continue this conversation. But we have the flesh that plays a role into this, and your flesh has desires. Adam and Eve were created to be married and be one, and we all have that desire in ourselves to have a spouse and have a partner in life that we want to spend the rest of our lives with, and that's biblical. It's biblical to find someone and get married to them. But here's the situation that I'm in right now, and the situation that I think a lot of us can find ourselves in. I am of the conviction that we should not date for anything but marriage. That is biblical. Obviously, or maybe not so obviously, we should avoid sex before marriage. That's the ultimate boundary that we should set. Obviously, fornication is not good. It's evil. We want to avoid sin. Pretty much, we don't want to go there. We don't want to even get close to sin when it comes to sex before marriage and anything like that, because it will destroy you. It will destroy your life. It almost happened to me. I was in a rough spot at one point, experiencing a lot of temptation. Things could have ended up a lot worse for me. But I got out of that situation, and I'm happy to say that I've learned some lessons from some mistakes that I've made myself. You really need to be ready for marriage if you're even considering dating, is my personal opinion. I struggled with this yesterday. Because I'm in this situation right now where I understand that this season in my life is not for marriage. And as hard as that is for me, because it is very hard, because I have those desires, they're very real, they're very strong, actually, even. And I have those desires for a partner. And but through my prayer, through my personal relationship with God, I have come to the conclusion that I'm not ready for that I'm not ready for marriage, and that I shouldn't be pursuing that right now. So, what happens when you decide that you're not ready for marriage, decide that you're not ready to commit to someone for the rest of your life, which I think a lot of us are in that situation as singles. That's a big step. That's huge. To say that I'm going to commit to you for the rest of my life, to say that I want to start a family, because it's the only next natural thing once you get married, is to start a family. To say that I'm ready as a man to support my family, to provide for them, to protect them, to do all the things that a godly man should do to provide for his family, that's a lot. And I'm just not there. I have to be honest with myself and knowing that I'm just not there. My health isn't there. My finances aren't there. Even my personal relationship with God, I'd like it to get better. I'd like it to get closer. I'd like to have some years under my belt of really walking with God before I jump into marriage, because that's what sets me up for success, is my personal relationship with God. Because it has to be. My personal relationship with God has to be even above my relationship with my spouse, with my wife. Because He is in control of everything, and He knows everything, and He guides and directs our lives, and He should be number one. He has to be number one. It's the only way. It's the way He designed it. Is Him first, others second, yourself last. And by deciding to wait for marriage, I'm putting my family first. And when I say that, I'm saying my future family, my wife. I'm putting them above my desires, because my desires would be to get married right now. But that's not God's will for my life. And so all that to say that I'm not dating right now. And maybe you decided that too. Maybe you've put that boundary up in your own life and said, I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait to date. I'm going to wait to get married. Now, if we wait to get married, there's the question, well, what can I still date? Can I still date if I'm not ready to get married? Can I just spend a bunch of time with someone, get to know them really well, and then wait to get married? I'd like to say the answer is yes, but it's not. And the reason that it's a no, the reason that you can't spend a bunch of time with someone when you're not ready to get married, is because that's not God's plan. It's not God's plan. And it's a very difficult thing to swallow. I was upset even yesterday, but it's something that I have to bear and I have to hold. And I'll get into why it's so difficult. I'll get into why it's so difficult in this video, if you'll bear with me. But it's not right to date without being ready for marriage. It's not right. And the reason that it's not right is because when you date someone, when you spend a bunch of time with the opposite sex, and you spend a bunch of time in these deep conversations, you develop a lot. You develop an insurmountable amount of emotional intimacy. And the reason I say emotional intimacy and not physical intimacy is because I think the emotional intimacy part is often the most overlooked part. Now, this concept can be applied to physical intimacy as well. So we'll just say, I guess we'll just say intimacy in general. But I wanna make sure that you understand that it's also emotional intimacy, but physical intimacy as well. So if you start dating someone, you start developing intimacy with them. If you hug, if you hold hands, that's physical intimacy, and you're developing that. And the more you do that, the more you're going to want that. If you start talking to someone that you're dating and have really deep conversation with them about your future, how many kids you want to have, where you want to live, what kind of jobs you want to have in the future, what careers, what are your hopes and dreams? Those conversations, and especially, I gotta mention feelings. If you lay your feelings out for someone, all of those things develop a lot of emotional intimacy. And so when we're developing intimacy, both physical and emotional, with a person, it's a good thing. However, if you're not ready for marriage, because I'm not ready for marriage, I can't do that. I shouldn't do that, because somewhere along the line of developing that intimacy with someone and continuing to do that, if I know already that I'm not ready for marriage, that process, which is only natural, has to stop. It has to stop at some point. And what that means is essentially you're dating someone and then you have to break up with them. And then you have to break up with them. Why? Because you're not ready for marriage. They could do nothing wrong. They could do nothing wrong. They could be, the prettiest. They could have the deepest relationship with God that you've ever seen with someone, because that is like the most important, really, is their connection with God. They could have all the characteristics that you want in a spouse, in a wife, in a husband. But if you know that you're not ready for marriage, you have to essentially break up with them. And why would you have to break up with them? Why can't you just date them for 2, 3, 4, 5 years? Why can't you just do that? Because it's unnatural. Because it's not God's design. He says, a man who finds a wife finds a good thing. You find a wife and you get married. And you better hope that you've done your research and you know what you're getting into. and you know the characteristics that you should look for in a person, in a spouse. The reason I'm saying that you can't date someone for an extended period of time is because it's too hard. Now, can it be done? Yeah, of course. And there are people that do it, and there are people that have success with that. Why I'm saying personally that I don't believe that this concept is biblical, and I don't believe that this concept is from God to date for an extended period of time, is because you have to essentially stop the process of intimacy. You have to essentially put a hold on that process. And yes, we need boundaries and we need things in place so we don't have sex before marriage, and so we don't even get close to sin is the best advice that is usually given by, Christian relationship counselors or other YouTubers or what have you, is not to even get close to sin when it comes to dating before marriage. But when you're developing that intimacy with someone and things are going well, you get to that point where you develop so much intimacy with them that you're essentially bonded to them, connected. And I'm talking even without sex. Sex will bring this to a whole new level. But I'm talking about any kind of intimacy. We're not talking about sex before marriage specifically in this video. I'm more talking about just talking to someone. Just having that those deep conversations with them. Just holding hands and hugging. The reason that you shouldn't do those things and shouldn't date before marriage is because you're going to get to that point where you want more. You want more with someone. And that's a good thing. But it's not a good thing if you're not ready for marriage. Because it will destroy you. You'll basically be breaking your own heart. And it's going to be so much easier if you don't get into that situation where you have that very intimate relationship with someone than if you date them and develop a ton of intimacy and then have to basically stop. Or regress and say, this is too much for me right now. That's a very difficult place to be. And it's going to hurt a lot. It's going to hurt a lot for either one of you. Talking to women is great. But if you know that there's something deeper there that you desire, and you're not ready for that, it's best just to wait. I was actually very upset about this yesterday, and I had to talk to God about it again. And what He told me is no. And what He told me is wait. Now, if you are ready for marriage, if you have desires and can't control them, the Bible does say that it's better to be married than burn with passion. And I understand that. However, look at where your priorities lie. And I've gone through a painful process to do this myself, and have had failed relationships. And my failed relationships point to the fact that I did not have my priorities in the right place. I was looking for relationships to satisfy the desires that I had instead of looking to God to meet my needs. Now let's talk about why it's so hard. Now I just want to say before I get into that I was trying to say, and I kind of lost my train of thought, that look where your desires are, look where your heart is, because your heart has to be on God first and foremost. That's His design for us, is to have a relationship with Him above any earthly relationship. We have to get our heavenly relationship down first. It can't work the other way. Now, yes, you can be married and develop a close relationship with God after you get married, but it's much more difficult. It's going to be a lot harder. And if I believe if we just wait and control our desires, that's going to be rewarded. So personally, the reason that I'm waiting right now is because I believe God has things planned for me in this season that I have yet to experience, that I have yet to dive into. I think there's things that He wants me to do in this season that requires me to be single. Being married or even just dating requires a lot of time and energy. It requires our focus. It takes our focus away from other things. And I need to be focused right now on my calling, on the things that I think God is calling me into in this season. My ministry, starting my ministry, moving, figuring out jobs and ways to make money and income, although God provides what we need ultimately. So that's why personally that I'm not dating right now, because I'm putting my calling and what I think God wants me to do in this season above what I want. Now, you can do what you feel called to do, but I would strongly urge you to put God first. And if that means getting married for you, go ahead. I'm not going to stop you. But if that means wait because God has something else greater for you, then that's what you should do. Now let's get into why it's so hard. Why it's so hard to wait. Why it's so hard to do things that, man, we don't want to do. Now, if you've been a Christian for a while, you might have heard about the flesh. You might have heard about this concept of the flesh and the concept of your spirit and your soul and the Holy Spirit. I'm not going to get into a lot of theology. However, I want to talk about a few important things that'll help us really understand why this is so hard for us. So the most important thing to understand here is the flesh. The flesh is our physical bodies. It's also our desires. It's our desires for food, for water. It keeps our bodies, our flesh keeps our bodies alive. But there's the things that are spiritual about the flesh as well. So the Bible does say that the flesh is evil. I don't know if I'm quoting that correctly. You can correct me if I'm misquoting that. But the works of the flesh are evident, and they are lust, they are witchcraft, they are adultery, they are jealousy. I don't know the full list, but they're wicked things. The flesh is selfish above anything. The flesh is greedy, it's gluttonous. The flesh is selfish. Okay? And so the flesh gives us sinful desires. And one of those desires that I deal with the most personally is the desire for sex, the desire for intimacy with a woman. And this is why it's so hard to wait, because I have that desire. And if I'm around women, even now, I've had my struggle with pornography, and I'd like to say that I don't deal with that at all anymore. Personally, I've had to put things in place, systems in place to avoid it, and that's what we're called to do is flee from sexual immorality. Flee, run away. Not even resist, but run away. And so I don't have my phone in my room at night. I personally can't handle it. I've struggled with that way too much. And I put physical systems in place in order to stop that. And so We have these desires. We have the desire for sex. So why is it evil? Why is this desire evil? Well, it's because of the fall of man. You have to understand that our flesh wasn't meant to be sinful. Our flesh wasn't meant to be against us. But our flesh is cursed because of sin. Our flesh is evil because of sin. It's not the flesh in itself, it's the sinful flesh. It's the evil desires, it's the sin nature that's against us. Adam's flesh before he sinned was perfect. They didn't even know right from wrong. You know why? Because all there was right. All there was good. They didn't have to know right from wrong because there was no wrong. When they sinned, it created wrong. It created evil in the world. And then they knew right from wrong. And then they knew. And then their flesh was against them. Adam and Eve didn't have to date. Adam and Eve didn't have to get engaged, get married. Adam and Eve were created for each other. And God put them together and said, "This is your wife." And I think it still can be like that today. But it's much more difficult because of sin. So, if we didn't have sin, we'd know who our wife was. She'd be right next to us. God would say, "This is your wife. Take her. And consecrate yourselves to one another. Become one flesh." Which basically means have sex. And that's what marriage is there are verses in the Bible about basically saying that marriage is sex and sex is marriage, those type of things. Don't quote me, please. But yeah. This is getting a little bit long. I'll wrap this up. But let's just say that if we didn't have sin, this process wouldn't be hard. We wouldn't have to wait. Our desires wouldn't already be awakened. Don't awaken lust. What is the verse? I don't know. Don't awaken something before it's time. I don't remember that word, but it has to do with sexual desire, I think. If we sin, we allow perverted thoughts to enter our minds and stay there. not so much the entering, not so much the temptation that's a sin. It's actually responding to those thoughts and acting on those thoughts that becomes sin. And seeking out pornography or pictures of women or staring at a woman for an extended period of time and lusting after her. Or sex before marriage. Or any sexual act. Not just penetration, but any sexual act. All of these things make our minds turn against us because it's pleasurable, and therefore we want more of it. It becomes an addiction. And if you've never struggled with that, congratulations, man. You must be either Jesus or have been raised very, very well. So, let's see here. Where was I? Well, our flesh is against us because of the fall, because of sin. But if we don't feed it, if we let those desires die, if we let those things that we did in our past, if we break those addictions, I'm not saying things are going to be perfect, but things will get a little easier. Things should get a little easier long term. Maybe the temptation will still be there. But we have the strength to resist it. There's always a way out. There's always a way out. From a dating standpoint, that's why you don't date unless you are ready to get married. I hope you enjoyed that. I went in a lot of different directions, and it might seem kind of jumbled together. Maybe I'll get better at these videos. I should probably make them shorter, but this is just spewing my thoughts out. So that's really all I have. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something from it. Leave your questions in the comments if you have them, or suggestions. Appreciate you guys. Have a good night.